Hi, local colleagues all around the state. Happy Election Day. It's also COP27 out there in Egypt. Hearing a little news here and there from that. So what's going on? It's a busy time right now. I don't know if you're feeling it. But the California Climate and Energy Collaborative team is really happy to have you back for our 13th meeting of the Local Energy Resources Network. Today, we're really pleased to feature a conversation with Abby Edwards. She's with the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, and she's going to tell us about some new climate funding opportunities that are really specifically targeting local governments and communities. So we're excited for that. Go turn on your cam if you don't mind. We do love to get to know you a little bit better during these meetings, if you're comfortable doing so. And go ahead and start introducing yourself over chat. Just tell us who you are, where you're coming from, what organization you're with. We are so happy to have you with us today. All right, let's go to our next slide. So I will start. My name is Angie Hacker. I'm the CCEC Statewide Best Practices Coordinator, joined today by a couple of the other members of the CCEC team, John and Kelsey, and you can always contact them if you're having any kind of technical issues. They're going to say hi over chat. So, as always, our purpose is to have this interactive 1-hour space every month that's designed to be a regular place for local governments and those that work with them to come together and help each other learn about these available opportunities to advance energy and climate goals. And sometimes, like today, we have an opportunity to even inform some of these opportunities. So you come here, and I know you're busy, so you can kind of get the scoop. Sometimes it's a fire hose, especially recently, and then take some information back home and decide how you can use it. So as always, we're going to go through some opportunities first. We have a spotlight on one particular opportunity. We're going to spend a lot of the time today with Abby on those adaptation grants, and then we'll have a little discussion there at the end. All right, well, let's roll in to the meat. So this first piece, and I'm trying to make this as digestible as possible, but I'm sorry. The world is crazy right now with funding. So you will get an access to this afterwards. This is, you'd be surprised, not the full list of opportunities that we're aware of. This is us actually being selective. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit about it. And it's a roundtable, right? The reason we call it a roundtable is because we're hoping you will help us. So as we walk along here, feel free to throw anything into the chat that you're aware of that you think your fellow colleagues around the state could take advantage of, events, trainings, funding opportunities, TA, anything that you think that they should know about. Please go ahead and add it. So you may have seen in our weekly and even in our funding webpage, we're trying to kind of be a little bit more clear about how we point you to opportunities. And so if, when you get this, you'll see view all opportunities, and that takes you to the fuller list. This short version is really going to highlight those things that are active now or funding that's on the horizon, and we mean in the next 3 months. And so those things that I don't have time to talk in detail about, you can always just go and see the full list that's online right now. The big thing I'm noticing this month, and you all are probably feeling it, is that the infrastructure bill funds are hitting the streets left and right. And the IRA funds are moving so fast. So, last time we talked about this, the sort of anatomy of how a grant gets born. So it starts in policy. Usually there's this long window where agencies get a chance to design their programs and gather input. And then there's an application to apply for funding. Right now we're seeing in the IRA really short windows of these, the guidelines being developed. So kind of the Wild West. That's what I keep saying out loud. It feels like the Wild West, and sometimes that chaos kind of lends itself to interesting opportunities for those that are sort of ready. In that vein, down at the bottom under other assistance, one of the first things I wanted to highlight for you was just from the climate mayors. They came out with a really good report, Climate Action and the Inflation Act guide for local government leaders. So if you really want a nicely tailored overview of what's coming out of the IRA, specifically for local governments, I would point you to that. And in fact, on the right here is a graphic that came from that report that I just thought they did a nice job. And so it's showing the breakdown of IRA dollars and just It's hard to see, but that first one shows that yellow is basically meaning the energy supply is receiving half of all IRA resources. So a lot of the dollars, a lot of the investments going into energy supply. And then down below, it's saying that the largest share of funds in terms of who's receiving it is going to be directed towards business tax credits. So that's that red piece of the pie. Interesting, right? Okay. So we've talked a lot about the active funding opportunities. So right under funding, those 4 things, we've talked about those are coming due. Hopefully, the big one there, I think, is BRIC, and hopefully you've already friended up with your emergency folks. It's due through Cal OES by December 2nd. And there is opportunity there for things like some of the energy resilience projects that you may have on your wish list. And then on the horizon, you can see in the next 3 months how many of these DOE opportunities that we've been talking about are going to start to get on the street. We talked about EECBG, that's a big one to be focused on. Formula grants, I haven't heard word since we had them come, but I will let you know as I hear more. They were expecting to have these out by late 2022. We'll see. We'll see if they keep up to that timeline. So OPRs here, where I have highlighted those, that's because OPR is going to go ahead and tell you about those directly, so I won't have to do it. But there's new grants, and I think you're going to be interested in them. Caltrans. Now, I know that folks want to hear more about transportation in these meetings, and I wanted to make sure that you're aware that Caltrans is going to have its Sustainable Transportation Planning Grants coming out pretty soon, by either December of this year or January of 2023. There's a few kind of sub-solicitations in there, but the one I think I really want to point out to you is called Sustainable Communities Grant. It's $29.5 million. It's intended to encourage local and regional planning that supports state goals, implements regional transportation plans, sustainable community strategies, and ultimately helps achieve the state's greenhouse gas emission reductions. And so it's an emission reduction. You all are doing your climate action plans. I know you all are working on EVs and active transportation. So this is a really good one. And what I wanted to do here was ask anybody to flag yourself in the chat if this is something that you've successfully, this is a grant that you've successfully been awarded in the past. And if we have time, I might even ask you to say something for 30 seconds or a minute. We just want to hear about those experiences. But this is not a new grant, but it is coming up again soon. I'm going to go ahead and highlight this next one that I highlighted, DOE Grid Resilience Innovation Partnership Program. It's expected to come out by Q1 2023. And so I'm going to actually spotlight that next. So let's just put a little pin on that for a moment. The next one I wanted to highlight is actually input opportunities, right? So those are funding. And then, like I said, sometimes there's these big input opportunities where we can help shape these programs. Here's some opportunities for us to do that down below. And one of them is the DOE Home Energy Rebate Program. So this is a $9 billion program from the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, and it's going specifically to states and tribes. California has been allocated $582 million. And so they are starting to run listening sessions, nationwide listening sessions between now and January 2023. Those are opportunities to go in and have a voice. A lot of you have a lot of experience doing residential energy efficiency. So these specific home energy rebates are for energy efficiency and electrification. They're consumer side rebates. So I would encourage you to help shape these programs. If you have time, if you can, show up to these listening sessions. We're also in contact with the CEC to see how our network may be able to support the state as it forms a plan for its own allocation. So more to come on that. The last piece of input I wanted to highlight here is a brand new program out of the EPA. This one is also funded by the Inflation Reduction Act. It's $27 billion for the EPA's new Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. The opportunity here is to provide public comment on it by December 5th. So the description here is it's a first of its kind program that will provide competitive grants to mobilize financing and leverage private capital for clean energy and climate projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It has a specific emphasis on projects that benefit low income and disadvantaged communities. And so there's some sub-grants here, $7 billion for competitive grants specifically for low-income and disadvantaged communities to deploy or benefit from zero-emission reduction technologies, including distributed technologies on residential rooftops. So there's a big focus here on disadvantaged communities, residential solar, and financing. And so I was at the first workshop. They're talking a lot about CDFIs, credit unions. Some of you have experience doing that. I used to. It reminds me of the ARA days where we were trying to leverage all this private capital against federal funds. It's something to look out for and actually something to provide input to. We're considering in-house here whether that's something we want to compile comments for. But if we do, December 5th, it's going to come quick. Okay, last thing I want to mention here is under other assistance. And I mentioned it last time, and I've talked about transformative climate communities, TCC. It's from the Strategic Growth Council. I've talked about it lots of times in these meetings. Round 5 is coming up in early 2023, and the Strategic Growth Council is proactive enough to have heard that TA really needs to come in advance of these programs. And so they're offering TA starting now so that it can help the communities that want to go for this get prepared. And so again, the TCC is intended to fund development and infrastructure projects that achieve major environmental, health, and economic benefits in California's most disadvantaged communities. So if you're a disadvantaged community intending to go for this, get some TA. It's free. Okay, so let's do actually, I'm going to look at the chat really quick. Oh, lots of good chats today. Thanks for being so involved, everybody. Did anybody happen to have any sustainable, the Caltrans grant, any experience they wanted to share? Let's see, raise your hand if you do. Did you guys see anything come up in the chat for that? No, okay. Well, I think what we're hearing in the survey for this, for these LERNs is that we'd love to hear more about your experiences. So I'm going to continue to be asking those kinds of questions. Oh, TA, somebody's asking what's TA? Sorry, technical assistance. Technical assistance in this way is meaning like pre-project planning or like application preparation. Okay, next slide, please. So here's one that I really wanted to share with you guys. This one's hot. I mean, there's just a lot of chatter around the state on this grant. This is the DOE's Grid Resilience and Innovation Partnership. So this was actually out of the infrastructure bill, $10.5 billion. And it's what I wanted to specifically highlight was one of the sub-programs. So on the left there, it's broken out into a few sub-grants. So the one I want to point you to is the one on the bottom. It's $5 billion for the Grid Innovation Program. And it sounds like the first year where they're going to make this available next quarter is going to be for $2 billion. So they're going to issue $2 billion in the NOFA next quarter. So Q1 of 2023. And the Grid Innovation Program is demonstrate innovative approaches to transmission, distribution, and storage to harden and enhance resilience and reliability, and demonstrate new approaches to enhance regional grid reliance implemented through the states by public and rural electric cooperatives on a cost-shared basis. And so you can see their units of local governments are eligible here. States are eligible. And I just wanted to let you know that the state's definitely interested in this. And what I wanted to kind of highlight here is, I wanted to ask, are you banking these grid resilience projects? To what extent are folks in local governments already tracking shovel-ready local projects that would do things like advance decarbonization, demonstrate innovative approaches to resilience, grid reliability and resilience, things like energy storage, microgrids, other technologies that support load reduction, especially in high impact areas with high frequency of PSPS events or wildfire. So that's, if you have those kinds of projects, I actually think we could flex our muscle a little bit. This is an opportunity to share some of these projects with the state to say, look, we know where we have needs. These are great projects. They're shovel ready. Where you have investment, if it's not here, if it's somewhere else, here, we're ready. We're ready for it. So email me because I'm trying to compile some of these for now. Okay, that's that for me. Thanks for bearing with another firestorm. I am finding ways to try to make it a little more digestible. But with that, we are very fortunate to now have our guest. Abby Edwards is the Integrated Climate Action and Resilience Programs Adaptation Planning Grant Manager. So in this role, she leads and manages the development, implementation, and administration of adaptation planning grants. And prior to this work, she was actually with CivicWell as the AmeriCorps program Civic Spark. She was the manager for that program. So, hey, we're all family, small world. She also served in the Peace Corps, doing some sustainable agricultural work in Senegal. So Abby, we're really happy to have you here today. She's actually going to share some information on some of the new adaptation planning grants that are coming. And I'm bringing those to your attention because OPR has done a really nice job in their guidelines of trying to make these flexible programs that do multiple things. So where you're hearing adaptation, you might be thinking, I'm not adaptation, I'm mitigation, or, this is outside of my wheelhouse. Hopefully not. Hopefully you're doing these things maybe in connection with each other, but there are things in here for mitigation. So there's provisions in here that really tap into helping to solve some of the needs in energy resilience and even local climate action planning. So we're bringing those here today to see how we can benefit. Some of the work that you're doing can benefit from these new programs. So I'm going to pass it off to you, Abby, and folks that have questions, please add them to the chat as you listen, and then we'll come back for discussion and Q&A. So Abby, on to you. Thanks so much for being here.
All right. Thank you. Can everyone see my screen? Good. Thumbs up, maybe. Okay, great. Yeah, thanks.
Oh,
Actually,
sorry,
no,
Kelsey,
Abby.
I think you're still sharing your screen. There we go.
Okay, got it? Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you all for inviting me to this conversation. I'm happy to be here. As Angie mentioned, my name is Abby Edwards. I use she and her pronouns, and I am the Adaptation Planning Grant Program Manager on OPR's ICARP team. And I'll start today by giving sort of a brief overview of the 3 grant programs that ICARP has right now. And then I'll dive into the details of the Adaptation Planning Grant Program, which is the one that I manage. And then throughout, we'll be adding some links in the chat for you all to follow along. And then at the end, really want to open it up for questions if anyone has questions, and then a space for feedback as well. So I'll get started. So ICARP is charged with administering the three grants listed. So there's the Regional Resilience Planning and Implementation Grant Program, which is $250 million over 3 rounds. There's the Extreme Heat and Community Resilience Grant Program, which is $175 million over 2 rounds. And then there's the Adaptation Planning Grant Program, which is $25 million over 3 rounds. So I'll share just a little bit more about each program over the next few slides. So this for the Regional Resilience Planning and Implementation Grant Program, as I mentioned, it's $250 million through the 2021 climate budget. They were allocated this funding. So the funding aims to support local, regional, and tribal entities' regional scale climate resilience solutions, to support regions in advancing resilience through 3 major activities: capacity building, planning, and project implementation. And the first round will invest $25 million, and of that, $12.5 million will support regional climate adaptation planning and action plans. So we'll share their listserv in the chat so you can keep up to date with the latest. But really right now they did listening sessions over the summer, and they're in their period of drafting their guidelines, and they intend to release the draft guidelines in January. And so there'll be an opportunity to weigh in on those guidelines and help inform the program in more detail. The next one, we have our newest program. So OPR received funding fiscal year 22-23 for the Extreme Heat and Community Resilience Program, which both coordinate the state's comprehensive response to extreme heat and build capacity for heat action planning in the most heat burdened communities through funding and technical support. So this includes 175 million in grant funding for local, regional, and tribal heat reduction and mitigation efforts. And as mentioned, we're still in the initial stages of the program's development, but look forward to kicking off formal engagement to inform the program soon. So if you'd like to stay up to date on this development or have input on the direction of the program and how it can support your work, please feel free to reach out to me. Also, if you know someone who would be a good fit for this program, I'll add some links to job postings in the chat. It does say that they'll close today, but we're actually going to extend the deadline. So we're looking to staff this program up and fill 4 different positions for it. Shameless plug. So last but not least, we have the Adaptation Planning Grant Program. And that's, as I mentioned, 25 million through the 2021 climate budget. So through ICARP, the Adaptation Planning Grant funding aims to fill local, regional, and tribal planning needs, provide communities the resources to identify climate resilience priorities, and also to support the development of a pipeline of climate resilient infrastructure projects across the state. So as mentioned, the funding will be appropriated in 3 rounds, and for a little bit of kind of what we've done to date, we launched the program in the spring to kick off the listening sessions, develop the guidelines over the summer. We released them this fall, and I see some familiar names of people that engaged in the public comment period, so thank you. And I'll share some of the latest after we get into the details of the program. And you'll find sort of some of what I'll share a little bit more conversational, just letting you know that some of the things that are in the guidelines might not still be true as we are making edits. So for an overview of the program, we have several goals to support equitable outcomes and wide geographic economic diversity and economic diversity in applicants, to support much needed integrated infrastructure planning to achieve community resilience, to help communities plan for and respond to multiple climate risks by supporting an all-risk approach. So for example, providing flexible funding to conduct integrated planning activities that intersect with climate risks, such as land use, transportation, housing, natural resource management, infrastructure, hazard mitigation issues, etc. And lastly, build community planning and capacity by supporting peer-to-peer learning, information sharing, and publishing case studies on our clearinghouse. So for this next section, I'll be referencing the draft guidelines that we released in September. We'll add links in the chat for you all. And as I mentioned, we're working through edits. So some of the information might be outdated. So apologies, you're kind of catching me at this unique period in time where we're making changes. So bear with me. So the first few pages of the guidelines, if you're following along, our background. So we'll start on page 7 with eligible applicants. So eligible applicants for the program may include, but are not limited to, local public entities. And there's a long list of what qualifies as a public entity in the PDF. And California Native American tribes, including federally and non-federally recognized tribes or tribal serving organizations, disadvantaged unincorporated communities, and community-based organizations, nonprofits, philanthropic organizations, non-governmental organizations, and others with a demonstrated history of representing vulnerable communities. And as mentioned, there's more information on all of that in the guidelines. So diving a little bit deeper on the eligibility requirements, in addition to the eligible applicant criteria on the previous slide, we're encouraging co-applicants. So there should be a minimum of 1 co-applicant partnering with the lead applicant on the application. And either the lead applicant or one of the co-applicants should be a public entity. And if public entity support is not feasible, applicants are required to submit a justification to explain why. This is the area we've gotten some feedback on initially, in the sense of saying that that requirement would be challenging for folks. And so we're adding a little bit more detail on what that justification will look like. And So furthermore, while applicants are strongly encouraged to include robust, diverse, multi-stakeholder partnerships in their applications, as I mentioned, it's not always feasible. So we're just asking for that justification. And we do, in the scoring criteria, which we'll go over, we do prioritize applications that can demonstrate that strong partnership and or plans to establish that partnership in their planning approach. So moving on to eligible activities. And if you have any questions that come up through this, please feel free to add them to the chat and we'll get to them at the end. So the eligible activities section were derived from our spring 2022 public feedback and are structured around the 2020 Climate Adaptation Planning Guide, which outlines a 4-phase planning process that communities can use to plan for climate change. So I'll add a link to that guide for reference for folks. But the 4 phases of the planning guide are shown here on the slide. So like the planning guide, the eligible activities section is really designed to be flexible to meet communities wherever they may be in the planning process. While the examples of the eligible activities are outlined in the phases, eligible projects can occur at any stage of the planning framework. They don't need to hit on every phase. The idea is just to provide some structure. So some activities that might be of interest to all of you that are outlined in that section: preparation, adoption, and implementation of a climate action or adaptation plan, execution of studies and analyses, so analysis of fiscal impacts, for example, that inform a community's effort to address the impacts of climate change, and then identifying and preparing project sites for implementation of a community adaptation strategy or set of strategies that include site identification, feasibility studies, and planning for project readiness. Something we do really here is like a planning grant is great, but if it's not tied to any implementation funding, then it's just kind of just creating a plan. So we're really trying to address that through any sort of support we offer throughout the post-award activities. And the structure of this is really to help communities align their project with statewide guidance, resources, examples, and tools. And then additionally, equity and community engagement are really integrated throughout all phases of the adaptation planning guide and should be considered for all the proposed activities. So we also outlined some ineligible activities. So some of those include implementation of construction projects, so including direct and indirect construction costs, initiation documents, engineering plans, and design specification work, as well as capital costs and maintenance costs. And then originally we had CEQA and NEPA as ineligible, but after receiving some extensive feedback, we're reconsidering this part and consulting with some people in our staff around what it could look like to fund some of these projects. So more to come on that. As I mentioned on the slide, it is under review. So for the application itself, planning grants will be evaluated and awarded through a competitive process. So applicants will submit applications electronically along with the materials, and the applications will be assessed for their ability to address all the scoring criteria that we'll talk through on the next slide. And then additional documentation is just a budget, work plan, and letters of support. All right, so if you are following along, we're on page 16 of the guidelines. So for the scoring criteria, each application should describe the project in detail along these specific scoring criteria. I'll also note here that through the public comment period, we received some really helpful feedback on the scoring criteria. And so we're addressing some of that. So some of that looks like combining some of the sections. So for example, we're combining project vision and objectives to be just one section. But some of these sections that we're keeping are the community needs and priorities, where we'll ask applicants to demonstrate how they will identify community needs and priorities based on the feasibility of meeting those needs. And then the co-benefits criteria, so that applicants will ask them to demonstrate how their proposed planning activities provide climate mitigation co-benefits, which can range from social equity to environmental co-benefits. So for example, building climate responsive energy solutions that improve community capacity to respond to supply deficits and provide mitigation co-benefits. So as Angie said, really trying to, I know it's an adaptation focus, but really looking at the co-benefits. And then, further, there's a lot of detail here in the guidelines, and you can reference that, but we are working on adjusting some of those sections to kind of simplify a little bit and reduce some redundancies. All right, just a couple more slides, and then we'll open it up to have more of a conversation. So as far as the program elements and technical assistance, grantees and their partners should use the beginning of the grant term to develop an action plan, and that will build upon the work plan that was submitted. And this will specify key activities, identify roles and responsibilities, and establish timelines. And further, we ask that grantees incorporate evaluation activities into their scope of work, including the progress reporting and case study development. So ICARP staff will provide some support with the application development, project development, and implementation, and that's outlined in the guidelines. And as Angie mentioned, TCC, the program at SGC, is providing a really good example of what it looks like to have support for the application, technical assistance support for applications up front. And we're really looking and setting that up for round 2 and 3. Unfortunately, we didn't set that up for the first round, but really are looking at it for future rounds. And then all awarded grantees will receive some implementation technical assistance from ICARP program staff, as well as other state and federal agencies, and possible third-party entities throughout the grant term based on feedback we hear and need that people have. So as far as the funding amount, but
Abby, did we lose you?
Oh, can you not hear me?
Oh, you're back. You froze for a second.
Okay. It says that my internet connection is unstable. Hope you can still, maybe I turn my video off. Let's see if that helps.
I'll let you know.
Okay. Yeah, so for funding, we have $6,600,000 for the fiscal year 22-23. And we have mins and max amounts in the guidelines, and we're reevaluating those amounts, but it should look like anywhere from 100,000 to 600,000. And we also have funding targets. So, we really were hoping to do some funding set-asides, but we don't really have the statutory authority for that. And OPR's ability to allocate funding for the Adaptation Planning Grant program is governed by authority from granted to us by statute. So we chose to implement a system of funding targets that will prioritize tribal applicants and other vulnerable communities. So more on that in the guidelines, and we'll add more detail there too in the final guidelines. And then lastly, we don't have any match required for the planning grants. So last slide here, we wrapped up public comment period on October 28th. And during that time, we received a lot of really insightful feedback. So before we wrapped, I just wanted to share some of the immediate changes that will be reflected in the guidelines. So first and foremost, we extended the application window. So we plan to release the final guidelines and application at the beginning of January and have the application open until March. And that will push the award window to later spring 2023, early summer. And yesterday we launched our intent survey. So you can use that QR code that should get you to the intent survey. And that's just signaling that you're interested in the program, and it just asks a few questions about the project to get us started. And then, as I mentioned, combining the scoring criteria, consolidating, clarifying, and then, adding some clarifying language around the application applicant requirements, and then moving away from the DWR grants portal for application submission based on some feedback. So link in the chat for the intent survey if you are interested in the program. and you can use the QR code too. So that sort of wraps up the overview that I have on the actual Adaptation Planning Grant program. I have some questions here for folks to consider. Really, as I mentioned at the beginning, so obviously the Adaptation Planning Grant program is a little bit further along than the other programs, but the regional program and the HEAT program as well are really looking to get feedback to help inform the program to make sure that the program isn't being duplicative of other programs that exist, that folks can leverage the funding from these programs to support broader projects. So really looking to be as responsive to the needs on the ground as we can be. So that's why we're trying to use as many of these sessions, opportunities to really collect any feedback and clarify any questions. So these are some questions we can go off of, but also kind of we'll hand it over to Angie to see, the best way to facilitate this conversation.
Yeah, so I mean, I think these questions are good. They're big picture questions. I want to give you guys a chance to kind of mull them over. You can raise your hand. Oh, I see somebody already was ready. Oh, did they disappear? All right, raise your hand if you have some things you want to say here. And actually, can we keep those up, those questions up, just so people can keep considering them? And then I also want to tackle some of these questions we got, but it sounds like Robert Perry, do you want to go ahead and ask your question or make your comment?
Yeah, no, great presentation. We are clearly awash in grant programs. There's a literal sea of pots of money out there, and surf's up. It's enter the water at your own risk. I'm kind of curious, is there any thought at the state level of developing a program that assists community in developing like a community profile to where they can articulate their assets and needs, and based upon that assessment, connect communities to relevant grant programs? I mean, it seems right now there's all these different programs and they require kind of an initial investment of resources that a lot of communities don't have at the moment. And it's a real barrier. And if there could be something that's more kind of outcome based that allows the community to kind of define themselves and then take and use that to tailor an approach that cuts across various programs and also different sectors, energy, housing, transportation, water, equity, it would seem to be something that could be of real use. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. I'll just respond quickly. It's definitely your thoughts are well received. It's something that we are consistently hearing. And so really we're kind of trying to coordinate with other grant programs and sort of see what their outreach looks like, how we can actually not just inundate communities with all these opportunities and be more streamlined for them, how we can kind of communicate internally. So it is like such a, it's a blessing and a curse, I guess, in the sense of having a lot of funding, but almost too much in the sense that people don't really know where to go, and any support we can give to kind of support people in that process is really needed at this point in time. So definitely feedback we're hearing and really considering and mulling over. So we'll add you to the list of folks that have shared that. Thank you for sharing and elevating it.
Robert, you probably are aware too of the Regional Climate Collaboratives program too from the Strategic Growth Council that just closed. I think it was trying to get at some of that, sort of prepping ourselves for funding by region. So I encourage you to look at that one too. Those ones haven't not been awarded yet. All right, Nick from Albany.
Yeah, I want to second that suggestion that Robert came up with. Albany, California is about 20,000 people. And if you look at sort of the general, metrics of the city, which are, not down at a granular enough scale, it looks like a relatively affluent community. Some of it is, but over half rent. And there's a large contingent of sort of housebound seniors and low-income rental people that is very difficult to reach. And the city itself has very minimal staff. I mean, we do benefit from your program of having Civic Spark Fellows. I think we have 2 right now, and they help with we have a pretty well worked out climate action plan, but the implementation is where we're falling down. We've done the low-hanging fruit, community choice aggregation. We've all gone on to that. But now we need to get the word out and try to educate people. And the hardest people to reach are tenants in apartment buildings. And it's hard to assist them, both on just, disaster response preparation, which I'm involved in, and just, moving towards, lowering carbon footprint and electrification. Of course, if you're a renter, that's very difficult. You don't have any control over the building. So these are half our community, or at least a quarter of our community, is in this situation, and they're very difficult to reach. And I would love to have volunteers that would get us to identify the granularity of our demographics and find out exactly where they are and outreach to them, which is sort of a service beyond what a little small community like we can do. So I think there are a lot of people that qualify for disadvantage embedded within our community, but it's complicated and arduous for us to actually effectively reach them. So assistance on that would really be helpful, especially just manpower or person power, excuse me.
Yes, person power. Thank you, Nick. I appreciate that, and it's heard and captured for sure.
Thanks, Nick. Geraldine, I saw you had a question in the chat too. Go ahead and address both if you'd like.
It's actually the same question. I just wanted to elevate it. My question is, you had the 3 concentric circles, or the 3 Venn diagram circles, and one of them was an extreme heat program that looks like it's farther along in next year and in early 2024. But I'm from Los Angeles, and our climate emergency mobilization office for the city of Los Angeles has been doing listening sessions. And they have found that people's most serious concern about climate change is extreme heat. And one of the practical solutions we see to extreme heat is the development of community resilience centers in disadvantaged communities where during brownouts or blackouts, folks don't have access to electricity. And so if there was a community resilience center that's located at a local faith-based community, or in a library or at a senior center, that could be a place where folks could go to plug in medical equipment, to be a cooling center for those who are vulnerable. And I just wondered if that extreme heat program that will be unveiled more in depth next year, if that would be open to supporting the development of such climate resilience centers.
Yeah, thank you for your comments. And happily, so a couple of thoughts there. There is the Strategic Growth Council does have their community resilience center program that they're standing up. I don't know if you've been in the loop on that program at all. They're kind of doing it in partnership with CDFA. But an interesting thing to pay attention to and look at. And yes, for the extreme heat and community resilience grant program, resilience centers is definitely high on the list of things we've heard from people as should be eligible activities. And fortunately, that program, it does have planning dollars and also implementation dollars. So there's opportunity for multiple angles with the resilience centers. So that and also with the Strategic Growth Council program, I think that there will be hopefully a lot of opportunity in that space to develop resilience centers and to have funding for those projects. So a couple of exciting opportunities, I think, coming down the line next year for resilience centers in general.
Okay, so there's a couple questions also in the chat, and some of them have to do with definitions. It sounds like, Abby, you guys are working on defining some of the eligible applicants. So Alice and Maybell are both asking for a definition of DUC, which I think was disadvantaged unincorporated community.
Yeah, so that we have the That's an edit we're making. So right now we don't have it referenced in the right way. And so we're editing that for the final guidelines.
Okay. And then there's also mention of the target community, which is economically disadvantaged rural community. I imagine that's the same thing. We'll see a formal definition.
Yeah, is that under the FEMA? That is under the FEMA target. Yeah, if we don't have that in the glossary, I'm sure it's been elevated to us, and we can define that further.
And Abby, those targets, when you say targets, and maybe you already clarified this, but you don't have a specific percentage required to go to those targets, or do you? So it's really just can you tell us a little bit more about how that fits into the criteria for how you'll make selections?
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question. So really, it's sort of our workaround for not having specific set-asides. And what we're looking to do is through the scoring criteria, we're outlining sort of what a high, medium, and low score could look like. And in those sections, elevating if you fall under a funding target and meet the criteria, then kind of elevating to a high score. We're kind of working out the mechanics of what that can look like, but really it's our way of setting the intention of where we want to fund some of the projects. Hopefully that clarifies it.
Great. And then Ron Allen he has a suggestion here. It says, it seems like the grants are directed directly to communities. Can OPR be more flexible to indirectly course grants to local government facilities, such as building electrification master plan or solar PV master plan, where both plans could become springboard references for replication to communities? I think he's saying, can these things target a municipal plan, not just, not community wide?
Yeah, I think specifically the Adaptation Planning Grant Program has a smaller, more localized scale than the Regional Resilience Program, to be determined about the Extreme Heat Program. But yeah, I think that there is the flexibility to have a more a smaller localized scale of the project, and we have that kind of flexibility built in. But really are looking to prioritize projects that are working with a broader community as well. Hopefully that answers your question. I'm pulling it up in the chat just to make sure I addressed it.
Yeah, it may be a point of reference for the guidelines as you finalize them, just if those kinds of plans would qualify. I really like how broad it gives room. It gives room for what local governments and their partners really need. And so part of the reason I brought this here today was because actually I saw one of the provisions in the guidelines talks about co-benefits. It says building climate responsive energy solutions. This is one of the objectives, building climate responsive energy solutions that improve community capacity to respond to supply deficits and provide mitigation co-benefits. Well, that's what a lot of you guys are focused on. I hear it all the time, and I just want to mention it out loud here as a form of input, that local governments are having a hard time identifying dollars to do that level of an analysis, and especially advanced analysis. So kind of what we heard earlier, where in order to prepare for these shovel-ready projects, we need to really have a good understanding of our energy resilience needs and have those projects sort of wish list out. And in some cases, advanced planning conducted. And this grant could really do some of that. It might have to be done in the context of a larger adaptation plan, but I just want folks on the line to hear that this grant could really help on the energy resilience front and on some of where there are co-benefits, where there are mitigation and adaptation benefits for specific projects, say like a solar plus storage microgrid. This might be a good place to make some progress on that. Nick.
Yeah, I'll sort of spin off of that. As a small city, Albany, having shovel-ready projects and putting a lot of effort and everything into, we've got it all designed, here it is, and we know what we're doing, or shovel-ready in the sense of, you know exactly what you're doing. We're starting now, we came up with a methodology for actually raising some funds through utility tax. And if you know about City Climate Corner, is a podcast. If you go there, you can hear an interview with myself and our city council member that pioneered that. And that was a way for small cities to adjust their utility tax, at least in California here where we have that, and gain a little bit of revenue and we've done some pilot projects. So my question is, you know, shovel-ready project versus pilot project. I think one of the advantages of small communities is that you can roll out a simple pilot project, and we're doing one now about putting EV charge stations in multi-unit family buildings. We took 3 apartment buildings just by reaching out to landlords and said, hey, who wants to get like $15,000 assist from the city to do this? And we found some, and you know, we're hopeful as a small city we can start some things like this and be an incubator, and then get the word out so that other people go, hey, we can do that too. But is there a special funding or which grant would be most applicable to just supporting a pilot project that wasn't, you know, a huge thing, but something that would come up with some information and some approaches and some policies that would be beneficial to other communities?
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, I hear you, and I think that as I think Angie was mentioning, and as we highlight in some of the eligible activities for the program, one idea is to, you know, support programs to develop sort of a pipeline of moving from planning to implementation phases. But as we've mentioned, you know, there is flexibility, and you know, as you've sort of described a project that could potentially be scalable, replicable in other communities, I think that's great. And that's definitely something that we're looking for as well. We're just, you know, the idea of the shovel ready and idea of wanting to move folks from planning to implementation is to support sort of the feedback that we get around, well, a plan, if you just create a plan and it's not connected to any implementation dollars, it just sort of sits there. But sort of what you're sharing is, you know, this idea of like replicability, hard word, and, you know, sharing case studies and other things that we're also looking for, you know, as one of the main goals of the program as well. So definitely have the flexibility for supporting that type of work as well.
Yeah, you know, so it doesn't sound like these programs, these are more planning programs. These aren't going to be your innovative pilot programs, but there are some. So let me go digging, Nick. I can bring those back. Even the script program is kind of like that. Okay, so I'm going to mention a couple more things that came into the chat, and then we're going to move to our last piece. Annie Seacrest is saying a couple of things that I think are worth saying out loud. I have a hard time developing projects that I know will not be immediately funded. That's making it harder to have shovel-ready projects. I have wish lists, but no way to really move forward with that with limited capacity. So that's something, you know, to hear, and we keep saying it over and over again when we have an opportunity to provide input, is the core staffing on the inside is some of the biggest need to move these projects forward, and be able to pay for those core staff through some of these grants would be really helpful. And then let's see, we have one more, we have a question. Leslie is asking, identification of disadvantaged communities seems to be different between California EnviroScreen and the Federal Justice 40 Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. And they want to know how Justice 40 communities can be considered in the state grant programs. Thanks, Leslie. It's like the third or fourth time we've heard this feedback, so we're looking into it, and it's definitely on our radar. So let's keep in touch, and you can see in the finalized guidelines, hopefully we'll be able to consider including that as well. And then last comment I'll mention out loud here is from the city of Alameda, talking about the highest ranking priority adaptation projects based on a list of criteria like co-benefits and nature-based solutions. So you'll see, we'll give all of these chats and all the recordings to Abby so she can make sure she includes that as she's finalizing her guidelines. I want to say thanks so much to Abby for being here and for presenting, and thanks everybody for your good comments and questions. Thanks to OPR in general for creating some really great programs that I think we can all benefit from. And now that you know about them, you can start thinking about how you might prepare to take advantage of them, and we'll be excited to see the TA opportunities start coming out so you can get some help preparing. Okay, let's get our last couple of slides up. And we're just going to wrap things up actually with a poll. So, you know, we spent a few minutes talking just about kind of SEEK and some of what we're working on. one thing that we've been trying to do is to really pick and choose which opportunities we are going to try to compile comments on. So obviously you come to learn, sometimes you can provide input on the spot directly to folks, nice folks like Abby. There's some of these other input opportunities that we were talking about earlier that we want to know which of these are most interesting to you. Which ones do you wish that SEEK could kind of take the lead on compiling comments and potentially submitting comments for? So that's the poll I'm hoping John can help launch right now. So it's multiple choice. You can select more than one, but which of these do you feel most strongly that SEEK should try to compile comments on? So you got the CEC's Integrated Energy Policy report, also called the IPER. We talked a little bit about the EPA Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund input opportunity earlier. We also talked about the DOE Home Energy Rebate Program, had some listening sessions and potentially working directly with the state on their allocation. And then the IRS Treasury has their clean energy tax credits. The first set of notices is already closed, but we have till December 3rd, I want to say, on the last 3 notices. And one of them is carbon capture. It's kind of, I know folks here have a lot of feelings about carbon capture. So if that's of interest, let's give it another few seconds and just make your selections, hit submit, and then let's take a look at what you all said. All right, let's go ahead and, what do you think, John? Is that enough time? Did you get a good response?
I was actually just about to ask folks, are folks able to respond to the poll? Okay, I'm not seeing responses come in on my end, but maybe they'll show up when I close it.
I'm seeing responses.
Okay.
Looks like about 75% of people have responded, 79, 80.
Well, we're getting up there then.
Yeah,
Abby's playing double duty. Do you want to share it? Well, let's close it. Let's go ahead and close the
Okay.
poll
Okay.
and let's look at results.
Share results. Can you see them?
Yes. All right. EPA Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund was number 1, followed by the IPER. Okay. Super helpful. Hopefully we can screenshot that or keep that poll result. That's great. We're going to try to figure out, we don't have all the bandwidth in the world. So we're trying to figure out which of these to pick. And what I wanted to ask, if any of you are out there already crafting comments on any of these 4 things, and you want to collaborate with SEEK, or we can hop onto yours, or if you're just really interested and want to help SEEK with comments on any of these things, so you have some very particular points of input you want to make sure get into our comments, I'd really love it if you just email me. So there's my email address. Maybe somebody can drop that in the chat too, just to make it easy. You can email me, and I'd love to hear it. If it's just, if you're already compiling comments, I can kind of amplify that on my end as well. But that's kind of what we're trying to do generally at SEEK, right? Is not just make you aware of opportunities, but try to inform them, try to help shape them so that they work for you on the ground. One way to do that is through these comments. All right, the last question I have for folks is just, maybe we have to get to this another day, but what role do you feel SEEK can and should play in connecting partners for grants? This just keeps coming up, especially with the Wild West world of funding we're in right now. I'm curious, it feels like there's a niche we could help fill here. Just organically, folks are coming to us with opportunities and wanting to know who good partners are. And that's part of what I'm thinking is if at least we could compile what some of these really ripe projects are, we'd be ready to at least showcase those, at least to the agencies that are asking. So I don't know. I think this is a bigger conversation. Maybe we tackle this the next time, but if you have strong feelings about it, I would suggest you can email me about it. Just know that this is something on our agenda to try to figure out how we can sort of fill a niche here, fill a need. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so that's going to wrap us up for today. Thanks again to our guest speaker. Next meeting is going to be December 13th, and we are going to feature a year-end policy roundup where we're going to have Roger, that's Civic Wells Policy Director, and Stephen over at Local Government Sustainable Energy Coalition. They're going to do a legislative and a regulatory overview of the last year and some of the things to look forward to in the next year. So come back for that. We are also still taking feedback on our LERN survey. So if you want to provide feedback, we'd love to hear it, make these even better. And always feel free to share this invitation with others. We're really happy with the level of participation we're getting, but we'd always welcome more. With that, I'm going to say goodbye and say thanks again. We'll see you next time.